Hello, in this video I would like to show you an example of what I mean when I say dashboard. I think of a dashboard as a way to control the inputs and view the outputs of a model. This is an example of a pro forma model built on Hilton Corporation, where the team built out a full income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, and so forth to calculate what they thought that the value of the stock might be. And so they projected a value of $82 a share with one method and about $80 a share with another method. But their projection could change based on their inputs. For example, if I come up here and look at the upper left, COVID-19 was just coming to light at the time they built this model, and they didn't know what effect that would have in reducing revenues. And so right now we're looking at a zero reduction in revenues. But if I increase that number, I can see what a 10% reduction in revenues would have. Very little effect on the stock price right here. 20%, 30%. Their reduction in revenues, I think, was for a very limited time and really didn't have a long-term impact on the stock price. I'm going to set that back to zero. They also wondered if they might get a government bailout and whether it would be debt, which would actually help the stock price a little bit, or if the government were able to structure an equity bailout, then that would protect them from some downside. I also wondered about the effect of minimum wage. And so they put this slider bar, and what they found out was that minimum wage could have a very big effect because apparently Hilton employs a lot of minimum wage workers. They looked at our environmental sustainability plan and said if they were able to improve their water consumption per square meter, or if they were able to reduce CO2 emissions, then these are other things that might have an impact on the stock price. They also looked at the impact of who might win the election. Their assumption was that Donald Trump would keep taxes at 28%, where Joe Biden might raise them to 38%, or Bernie Sanders raised them to 48%. And then finally, they looked at competitors. So what would an increase in a competitor's market share have? What effect would that have on the stock price? And so the takeaway from this video is that they used a lot of these controls up here to change their model and predict different stock valuations. And never once did I have to go into a cell in Excel and change a formula. It was all controlled through these controls. So let's start a new file and talk about controls. Control N for a new file. Now, if I were going to build a dashboard, I wouldn't want to start putting those slider bars and check boxes on this grid cell. I'd like to choose some cells, color them gray with an HH. Use my arrow to come up here and choose a gray that I like. I like a nice light gray background, like so. And then what I like to do is choose one less row on top and bottom and one less column on left and right. Do an Alt HH and pick a color that you like. I think that one might look nice. And while I'm here, I'm going to show you a trick. I'd like that blue palette, let's call it, to stand out. I'd like to create an optical illusion of it being in 3D. And the way I can do that is do an Alt HBM for more borders. Choose the thickest border I can find and a dark gray and put that on the bottom, and I'll choose the right. And then I'm going to choose a white. It's going to be hard to see, but I'm going to click here and here. I guess I also could have clicked that button and that button. And now when I say OK, let's see if the optical illusion worked. I think it did. I think it looks like there's a light in the upper left shining on the left and the top of this blue area and casting a shadow on the right and the bottom. And so that's just aesthetics. And another thing I could do for aesthetics is click those two using the Control key to get them both at the same time. And narrow. We don't need all that gray on the right and left. And now I have a palette that I can work with. I'd like to start drawing some of these buttons. Let me remind you what I mean by control. I mean a spin button, perhaps a list box, or a scroll bar, or option buttons, or maybe a check box. One they didn't use but could have would be a combo box. And let me show you what I mean by those. I don't have a developer tab up here, but I can right click, customize the ribbon, and click on the developer tab. And now I do have a developer tab. If you are on a Mac, just Google how to add developer tab to ribbon. And then you can click on that and insert, and you'll see form controls that you can use. ActiveX controls appear to be about the same thing as the form controls. Maybe there are a few little bit different ones. What you need to remember in this course is we will always use form controls in this course. We will never use ActiveX controls in this course. Please write that down in ink somewhere. Always form controls, never ActiveX controls. And so what kind of form control might we want to use? We could draw a checkbox and say, I don't know, let's say make the investment. And so if we were building a model where we wanted to see it with and without the investment, format that control by right-clicking on it and choosing Format Control. And I'm going to link it to a cell over here. I'm going to make it 3D as well. And if I had a model where I wanted to be able to turn on and off the investment, I could come here and say Investment. And I could say if that is true, then let me put an investment in the cell beneath it, otherwise 0. And if that investment were $10,000, then watch what happens to this cell when I check the box. It goes from 0 or $10,000. You can imagine that would be really handy in a model. And if you gave your model to someone who either wasn't an Excel expert or whom you didn't want in there messing around with your formulas, then this dashboard would be a really easy way to let them turn the investment on or off without having them get into the formula. And so we could put our inputs on part of the dashboard and our outputs on another part of the dashboard. That's kind of what this other one did. They had their inputs in this top half, and they had their outputs in this bottom half. And so when I say dashboard, this is what I'm talking about. Let's think about how we might design a dashboard to do some interesting things. The first thing I'm going to do is right click and copy and show you that we can Control V 2 or 3 times and get multiple checkboxes over here. Now I'd like to line these things up and make this look like some software that I had purchased. And if you were looking at software to purchase and you saw these over here not really in alignment, and maybe one of them was a little bit closer to the one above it than the one below it, are you going to trust the programming or the modeling behind that software? I would not. So what I'd like to see is those things lined up really, really well. So I'm going to go to Home and find something called Find and Select Objects. Now normally my mouse is a plus sign, but when I do that it remains an arrow. And so I can click and drag and select everything inside of that area. And now I'm going to do 2 things. First time I'm going to go to, actually I want to come up here to this shape format. And both of these 2 things are going to be under this Align drop down. And the first thing I want to do is align them to the left. And already that looks a whole lot better. But if I will click on Align again and distribute them vertically, now you can play with a whole lot of others, but I'm going to show you these 2. Distribute vertically. Now that looks like something that implies more professionalism. So I can go in there, I can edit. The way to edit that is to double click. Never exactly remember. And so we might have the option to make an investment. We might have the option to take a loan. Might have the option to buy insurance or sell the property. I don't know, I'm just making things up here. Now look what happens when I check one. All of them check at the same time. Anybody, you might hit pause and think about why that might be happening. Okay, the answer is because they're all linked to this cell. And let's color that cell yellow. Anytime we link these, let's color a linked cell yellow. So if I right click here and format that control, maybe I should link that one to a different cell. Before I do that, I'm going to move this out of the way. And then I'm going to right click and format control and V8. And so now when I click this one, notice there's a V8 over here. And I'll right click, format control, link that one to V9. Right click, format control, link that one to V10. And since these are all linked cells, we'll color them yellow. So we could have a whole lot of if statements down here in our model, looking at each one of these different cells independently and use them to control our model. So those are check boxes. We will also want to come over here and put some labels describing what these cells actually do and what that number actually means, but let's not get tied up in that because we're not building dashboards this week, we're just designing dashboards. But to design them, we need to know what's possible. So let's go back to the insert form controls. I'm going to skip the button because it's to run a macro, and that's way beyond our scope right now. But I'm going to do a drop-down box. I call it a drop-down box. Excel calls it a combo box. And if you right-click on that and format it, you notice not only do you have a cell link, but you also have an input range. And so if I link that cell over here, and I always like to have the input range right beneath it. Oops, that's not right beneath it. There we go. I'm going to give it 3 different options here. And I like them 3D shaded. I only need 3 drop-down lines, but I could leave that at 8 if I needed to. Okay, so let's come over here to, say, high prices, medium prices, and low prices. And look what happens. When I drop down this list, we see the words in the cells that I typed into this range called the input range, V15 through V17. And then the cell link is going to tell us which one we choose. So if I choose the middle one, can you guess what number is going to show up here? 2 shows up there. If I choose the top one, a 1 shows up there. If I use the bottom one, a 3 shows up there. So if high prices were $100, low prices were $50, medium were 50 and low were 25, then, and prices seems kind of a silly thing, but we're keeping it simple today. So let's say equals index. I'm going to index that range based on what is in this cell. Now look what happens. If I have low prices selected, I see 25 in the prices. If I move that up to high prices, that cell changes to 100. So again, you could let your user control your model down here with this combo box. So you see the pattern here. You draw the control, you link it to a cell, and then you write some kind of logic down here to control your model based on what's in the yellow cell. So let's do a couple more. Let's go to Developer, Insert. We did the combo box, we did the checkbox. Let's do a spin button. So let's say, okay, I'm going to start mixing my models here, and let's say retirement age, because one of the several groups are doing a retirement planning model. And so maybe I want to retire when I'm 65. I can actually link this one directly to, when I say cell link, directly to 65, to that cell G11. And so I can control that retirement age this way. And so I think both the spin button, I think that's what the other team used for the COVID-related uncertainty, And then I think they used the check boxes on their environmental uncertainties. They didn't use a combo box, but they did use, I think, some option buttons. So we could do an option. I'm going to Control C, Control V, V, and then I'm going to go back to Home, find and select those objects, Shape Format, Align to the left, and Align distributing vertically. Now watch what happens here. If I right click, I can format that control and link it to a cell over here. And that is V21. And so if I choose the top one, I get a 1, the next one I get a 2, and the next one I get a 3. I'm going to repeat that process quickly. In fact, I'm going to cheat and just copy paste. And let's say, so we need to make that yellow. And I haven't given these any names, but let me think of something. Okay, what I've chosen, and I've stuck with the wealth management theme for this one, is maybe we're looking at a high-risk portfolio or a medium-risk portfolio or a low-risk portfolio, and we might use this cell to drive different riskiness in our stocks. We also, in that wealth management model, might care about what kind of vacations does our client need to take. Nice ones or mediocre ones or none at all. And so we'd better link that to a different cell. Right now, since I copied them, they're still looking at V21. So I'm going to push them down to about V26. And I'll color that cell yellow. Now what happens? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those numbers are changing from 1 to 6 based on what I'm doing. I want this to be independent of that. So pause the video, think about all the software you've seen since you were a little kid, and what's wrong with this picture and this picture, and why would that make it impossible to select a button on both sides? So hit pause, think about it. It's because we don't have them grouped. This is called a group box. And if I'll draw a group box here, I'm just going to click on it, drag it, and let go. Paste it here. And just to be tidy, I'm going to shift and click, and then go to shape format and align the top of those. If I were going to turn this in for a grade, I'd make sure that all those buttons were aligned, but they look pretty good right now. And so this is actually the risk of our portfolio. Ooh, I'm going to undo that. Right click, edit. Let's call that portfolio risk. We're just making these things up. Right click, edit text. And now I should be able to right click and watch, I just have to change one button to format that control to look back at cell B21. And right click here, any of those buttons. Format control, and have it look at V26. Now I'm able to control these independently. And this one is about, let's call it portfolio risk, and this one is about vacations. So just throwing things on the board here, and remember this deal about having to put the group box on to get these sets of buttons to work independently. I promise that will well, I won't promise because I might forget, but every other semester I've taught this course, this is on the test. I'll give you a couple of sets of buttons. I'll tell you what's wrong with this picture, and you'll have to draw the group box around them. And somebody will forget. They'll say, oh, I didn't know they needed a group box around them, but they do. Next, I'd like to do a list box. A list box is not much different than a combo box. It's just that you can see all the options here. So I'm not feeling very creative, so I'm going to call it list item 1 and list item 2 and list item 3. And I'm going to link that to V29. So when I say right click, format control, I have the same possible inputs as I did on the combo box. I have an input range and a cell link. We'll make it 3D like the rest of them. And so notice now I can see all the items at once. And I think the team must have liked that better because they didn't use one of these. They did all their choices here. Let me show you again. This is a list box. This is a list box. And I don't see any combo boxes. I think the only other thing that they use that we haven't yet is the scroll bar. So let's go see if we can make a scroll bar. So let's do one for life expectancy. Now I could draw this thing vertically, or I could draw it horizontally. I'll make it horizontal, and we'll put a number up here. Let's say our life expectancy is 90. And let's right click, format control, link this cell to that 90. And well, we need a minimum value. Let's run that up to 60. Maximum of 100, incremental change of 1. And let's make the page change 5. And I'll bet you can guess what all those things do if you'll hit pause and think about it. So what we're saying is that when we hit the end, our life expectancy increases by 1 at a time. But the page change was 5. So if I click in here between this guy and the arrow, then it increases 5 at a time. Or if I click over here, it decreases 5 at a time. And of course, if I click here, then it decreases 1 at a time. So those are that gives you an idea of what controls are available. And at this point, I'm going to make a big change in the video and talk about your assignment coming up. So if you were reviewing this for the test, this would be a good place to stop the video. Your assignment for week 2 is going to consist of 3 slides. I've got more than that in here, but it's because I'm building them for different project categories. The 3 slides will be, one will be a title slide, just tell me who you are and what you're doing. The second one will be a problem statement, and this is an example of a wealth management problem statement. Recently, I went through this with my own wealth manager, and they interviewed me and asked me some things to help me plan for retirement, and then they ran a Monte Carlo simulation and showed me the results. So in class on Wednesday evening, I asked the students, what kind of things do you think they might have asked me? Well, they needed to know what my current age is. They wanted to know what age I'd like to retire. They wanted to know what the mortality tables say about how long I should be expected to live, and hopefully err on the high side of that so I don't run out of money. They need to know what my current net worth is and how it's allocated, or at least how it would be allocated in this retirement plan. They need to know how much money I'm currently making, how much do I currently need to live, and how much do I think I might need to live in retirement. They'd also like to know, do I have any specific purchases coming up? Maybe I'd like to pay for some weddings or college educations or cars, or maybe I'd like to take a vacation. So I just call that future purchases. And they asked me if I cared about having any money left over at the end of the plan. I could maybe plan for some heirs or something. Expectations of equity performance. So they need to know, and they don't really ask me, but they need to make some kind of an estimate of how the stock market is going to perform. Later we'll talk about a mean and a standard deviation of that, but we're not there yet. And then they also wanted to know, okay, so how does equity perform and how does fixed income perform? And so that was a pretty thorough interview that they asked me. And so what I'd like you to do, if you're doing wealth management, then most of this is just done for you here on the video. If you're doing a different project, I'd like you to think, well, what kind of inputs would I want to have on my dashboard? And then what kind of outputs would I want to show? And so in class, we talked about the output for a wealth management, for a retirement plan, might be, well, what's my probability of being able to make all those future purchases and have enough retirement living expense and have enough or money to pay for the expense and having a legacy at the end of the plan? So what's the probability of meeting that? If I do, what's the expected surplus? Hopefully we'll have more than just what I've put up here in my goals. And then draw a cumulative probability chart of showing those surpluses and the probability of getting them. You know, maybe there's a high probability that I have a few bucks left over, but a much lower probability that I have gazillions of dollars left over at the end of the plan. And so this is slide 2. And most of these are kind of done for you, but I want you to put your own fingerprints on this and your own creativity and have some fun with this project. See if there's anything you'd like to do slightly differently. And then the third slide that's due by Wednesday evening is one like this. And so I just spent about 20 minutes in the earlier part of this video showing you how dashboards are made. And I only did that so that you would have an idea, well, I could put a spin button on a dashboard. I didn't do it, but you could also have a place on that dashboard where you just typed into the cell in Excel itself. Let's go do that. On my dashboard here, I could have said current net worth, and my current net worth is about $5.25. No, it's a little bit bigger than that, but let's pretend like it were $5.25. I'm going to go back to the borders. I think before I gave you the shortcut, this time I'm going to say home, borders, more borders, in case you're on a Mac and the HBM doesn't work for you. And so here, I think before I used a really thick border here, I'm going to use a little bit thinner one because it's just for a cell. And I'm going to choose, this time I want it sunken, so the light coming from the upper left would cast a shadow on the top and the left, but it would shine brightly on the right and the bottom. And then I would also like to do an Alt-HH to come up here, and let's turn that cell maybe that color. And so we have a little bit of an optical illusion there with that being sunk in very, very slightly. So this is a way we could add just a number to the dashboard. Back to the assignment. So you could be adding your numbers, you could be using the spin buttons, you could be using the scroll bars. I didn't draw any on here, but you could use combo boxes or list boxes, check boxes, charts. I just want your team to spend some time over the next 5 days thinking about, well, what would we like our dashboard to look like? And so this is the creativity part of the assignment. And everybody's dashboard should look a little bit different. Everyone who's doing a real estate problem will have this slide to read and see what I thought might be some interesting inputs and outputs. Everyone who's doing a corporate finance problem will have this one to go over. Energy, likewise. And we'll also go over these in class on Monday. But again, the heart of this assignment number 2 is for you to get creative and start thinking about what kind of things on our dashboard would look really cool for our tool. And then just draft them out on a piece of paper like I did, take a cell phone picture of it and upload it into PowerPoint. If you want to get a jump on things and draw it in Excel, you can, but that's not why I put the Excel portion of the video earlier here. I just did that so you could get an idea of what these things will eventually be doing when we learn how to use them. So I look forward to seeing you in class and hope this video is helpful.